Hi, my name's Lisa Caripis, and I'm the Research and Policy Manager for Transparency International's Global Accountable Mining Program. You might have heard of us before at Transparency International. We are a civil society organisation in over 100 countries that works to tackle corruption. So why are we talking about corruption today as Transparency International? Why have we been invited to give this lecture? What's corruption got to do with gender and mining? Well, that's the exact question that in the Accountable Mining Program we've been seeking to answer for ourselves over the last year. And I'm excited to bring together what we've learnt about the links between gender, corruption, and mining in this lecture today. Maybe a bit of background before we start. So our program is the Accountable Mining Program. It's run in 20 resource-rich countries, and we focus specifically at the very first stage of the mining value chain. Now, this is the point that where governments make decisions about whether a mining project goes ahead, under what conditions. And importantly for this course, it's the point at which decisions really can determine the impact of a mine on the communities living close by, and of course within that, women. So when corruption affects decisions about whether mining goes ahead and under what conditions and which company gets to do mining, it's real people's lives who are affected. So we're going to use the licensing phase, this phase when contracts are awarded, negotiated, and concessions are granted, this first phase of the mining project cycle as the focus and case study for our lecture today. Before I get started, let's clarify one very important term, and that's corruption. Corruption, it's not just about paying bribes and money. The definition of corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And that means that we're interested in all actors in the mining sector who are entrusted with power. That could be government officials with the authority to make decisions about granting mining licenses. It's mining companies who are entrusted with power and have a relative position of power compared to communities who they're talking to about the impacts of their project. And within communities, traditional leaders hold a position of power. They're there to represent the interests of their community. So with that in mind, having covered what corruption broadly is, let's talk about the structure of today's lecture. So there's three key parts in this lecture where we'll talk about the links between gender, mining, and corruption. First, we're going to talk about the unique gendered forms of corruption, types of corruption that affect women. We're talking about, secondly, the impacts of corruption. So when a corruption occurs, how does it disproportionately or uniquely affect women? And the third aspect that we'll cover in terms of the links between gender, mining, and corruption is the role of women in combating corruption and ensuring that decisions are in the interests of women and that they're transparent and accountable. Before I go into each of those three aspects of the lecture, let's just remind ourselves of the roles that women can play. So far in this course, we've heard a lot about women as industry participants. It's worth remembering they're not only participants as employees of large-scale companies, but also as artisanal and small-scale miners. Women are engaged in the mining sector as members of host communities nearby the mine. And finally, as I've alluded to, women are also important actors in improving mining sector governance. So we're going to cover these different roles in the aspects of the lecture that I mentioned before. Let's start with the role of women as industry participants, as female and artisanal scale miners. I'm sure we all agree that these women should have an equal right to apply for a license and not be exposed to any barriers or treatment just because they're women. This is where the issue of gendered forms of corruption comes in, which is sexual extortion or sextortion. This is a form of corruption that primarily affects women who are seeking access to government services. It involves an implicit or explicit demand from a person in a position of authority for any kind of sexual favour in exchange for performance of their formal duties. Women dependent on artisanal and small-scale mining for their livelihood may be vulnerable to sextortion by government officials who demand sexual favours in exchange for processing or approving their licence application. This is especially the case when the system is designed so that women are attending the licensing agency by themselves and interacting alone with government officials. Now, we've seen evidence of this in the land registration system sector. More research is really needed to understand how prevalent this is in artisanal and small-scale mining. We need to combat gendered forms of corruption, and understanding the way it exists and the nature of it is an important place to start. The second aspect that I mentioned earlier on is the impacts of corruption and how they can specifically affect women. In lesson 1, you learnt about the gendered impacts of the projects at large, but when corruption affects decisions about mining projects, women can also be uniquely and disproportionately affected. We have a kind of an equation we've formulated that we like to wrap this up, and that is gender inequality plus corruption equals gendered impacts. So corruption can have a disproportionate and unique impact on women in host communities, in particular, exacerbating the inequality that they already experience. And to understand that, let's think about the aspects of women's lives at the community level that can be affected by corruption. Think about their livelihoods to begin with. Women who are dependent on the land in ways that are unique for men, for example, for subsistence to feed their families. If corruption in land negotiations, in government decision-making that results in women being dispossessed of their land, it's their livelihoods that will be uniquely and directly affected. Let's look at another example. When there's corruption and the government decides, because it's received a kickback, to award the rights to mine to a company that has no experience and is not qualified, and that company starts operations, and because it's not qualified and doesn't know what it's doing, pollutes local waterways and water sources. Well, it's women in that local community who have domestic responsibilities for caregiving, cooking, etc., who will be uniquely impacted. They're the ones who are going to have to travel further to get water. And as a result of that, they may be exposed to gender-based violence if traveling into unsafe areas. So the impacts of corruption on women will depend on the context. We really need to do this work in a context-specific way to research and understand the prevailing gender inequalities and gender norms that that affect women, to understand exactly how corruption will impact them. It's an important part of corruption risk assessment and mitigation. This takes me to the last part and the main part of the lecture, which is about women's participation to combat corruption. For the mining sector to be truly transparent, accountable, and governed in a way that puts the interests of people first, women must be able to participate and have their voices heard in decision-making about mining projects. Women and women's groups are key enablers and facilitators of anti-corruption efforts, and women in civil society organisations and at the community level, if they're given the space to express their voice and agency, play an important role in demanding greater transparency and accountability and advocating for women's rights, interests and concerns to be included in decision-making about mining projects. In this sense, strategies to tackle corruption in the mining sector will only be truly effective if they enable women's voice and agency. And to enable women's voice and agency, we need to identify and address the barriers created by gender inequality that hinder women's participation in decision-making and accountability efforts. So let's look at some of these barriers. The first one is low levels of literacy due to unequal access to education. So low levels of literacy among women in mining affected communities limits the ability of these women to access and understand information about mining projects. They may also not understand what their legal rights are to participate in consultation. So this undermines their ability to have a voice in consultation, to defend their land rights, and to ensure that their interests are being accounted for in agreements with companies. When women don't understand and cannot participate, it's easier for the company to provide misleading information about the mining project, to conduct tokenistic consultation, or simply to ignore consultation requirements altogether. This is an abuse of the company's power. Let's look at the second barrier, gender norms. We've started talking about that already in this lecture. Gender norms that deter women in mining affected communities from participating in community discussions or from collectively organising to advocate for their rights undermines their ability to hold community leaders, government and companies accountable for self-serving conduct. This makes it easier for those actors to commit corrupt acts and get away with it. Our research found in Ghana, for example, the Queen Mother is often sidelined in negotiations and consultation between the mining company and the community. And she has a really important role to play in representing the interests of women. So the fact that she's considered less important, her status isn't legally recognised in law, means that women often miss out in having their voices and interests heard and represented. The last barrier I'm going to talk about, very important in the mining sector, is often we see women's title to land or their ownership of land, it's not formally legally recognised. And we know that many mining projects occur in places where land rights aren't properly documented or recorded. Women in particular, Transparency International has done some study on this, maybe less able to secure recognition of their ownership and rights due to traditional and administrative barriers. Again, gender norms, here's the link between the barriers, may dictate that husbands or male relatives are the ones with power to decide in dealings with family land. So without legally recognised rights or title to land, women will be unable to protect their interests and negotiate with mining companies whose licence is going to cover their land. This makes it easier for companies to ignore women's interests in the land and for male relatives to take advantage and exclude women from negotiations and dealings with land for their own benefit. So at the heart of it, when we think about participation, anybody whose livelihood, rights and interests are affected by a new mining project should have access to information about the project in a way that's meaningful to them, be able to participate and have their voice heard. And really, we've learned a lot in this course so far about human rights assessments, gender impact assessments, environmental social impact assessments. These need to be done in a way that enables women's participation and breaks down the barriers. So let's think about, as a result of these barriers that we know exist due to gender inequality, what key actors can do. Companies need to have gender inclusive and responsive consultation practices. They need to address the barriers such as those I've mentioned that prevent women from participating, provide information in a meaningful way, and create engagement and consultation platforms that women can truly participate in. Governments need to recognise women's traditional leadership and land ownership. They need to make the consultation requirements clear so companies can't evade them. And they should fund programs to support women's education and civic engagement more broadly. Civil society organisations can support women's participation by improving and helping communities and women in communities understand their rights, by supporting them to meet with companies and government, and also helping them advocate on issues that concern them when it comes to mining projects. You can see there are links between gender, mining and corruption, and we're only really starting to understand these links. We've touched on three key aspects today: gendered forms of corruption, gendered impacts of corruption, and the importance of women's participation in the mining sector to combat corruption. to address the unique impacts of corruption on women and to tackle the barriers that prevent them from participating meaningfully in mining-related decisions, we need to understand the particular gender dimensions of corruption that exist in our context. Each context is different. Through the work that we've done, we've pulled together this knowledge in our Mining Awards Corruption Risk Assessment tool. So this risk assessment tool is about identifying and mitigating corruption at the licensing phase. It enables you to provide a structured approach and gender-sensitive way of identifying and mitigating corruption risks. This is available for you now in the resources. It's newly launched. Please do check it out. It's for researchers and practitioners alike. And we hope you can use this tool to help us all improve our collective knowledge and understanding about the links between gender, mining, and corruption. Thank you very much.